My name is Dan Murray Serter, and I'm the co-founder of brain health and mental wellness company Heights, alongside my co-founder Joel Freeman. Welcome to Working In with Heights. It's a series all about optimizing the most important organ in your body, your brain. For this episode, I'm joined by one of our favorite customers and mental health advocate, Stephen Fry. This work-in is all about living with mental health conditions. Obviously, you are globally well recognized as one of the leading activists.
Right.
Yeah, one of the leading mad people. Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. No, but one of the first people to come out and talk openly about it, being honest about it, pioneering the comfort, which is certainly accelerated in the last few years. But the comfort of being able to talk about it and talking about mental health like physical health. Now, I would love to know if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief overview of your own experiences with your own mental health and how that's developed over the course of your life. So, is it like you feel more stable, in the last few years than you used to, or is it not a continuum like that? If you could give us your life story.
Yes. Well, I mean, from almost the earliest time that my parents can remember, I was a hyperactive child, and I think had the condition been as readily diagnosed as it is now, I would have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and probably given Ritalin or something similar. And as it was, through school, by the time I got to 13 or 14, as I think is quite common when puberty starts to kick in a big way, I became pretty much unmanageable and was expelled from schools. But in the period before being expelled, my parents had sent me to a psychiatrist. In fact, he was a Tory MP. He was a health minister as well as a psychiatrist. Weird. But I only found out years later that he wrote on a piece of paper, which he sent to my parents and to my housemaster at school, bipolar ? Which was a very interesting diagnosis in those days. In those days, bipolar wasn't used very often. Most people said manic depression in there. But so he saw that there was something in my behavior because talking to me, he realized that I not only was very disruptive and manic in the schoolroom, but also that I had periods of extreme distress and closed down and couldn't be addressed or talked to. And then it all went so bad in so many schools that I ended up in prison. I mean, because I had a hint of kleptomania, which is not a diagnosed condition, but I got away with two years probation and then settled down to work really, really hard to get into university, which I was desperate to do because I'd thrown away so much of my schooling. And I got into university. I got a scholarship to Cambridge, and there I met some extraordinary people and was fortunate to join the Footlights and have a career in show business. And I had discovered how to work and to focus and to concentrate. And I kind of had periods of mania. And, I can remember my friend Hugh telling me quite early on when we were shooting one of our first television things that the director had come to him and said, is Stephen on drugs? And in those days, I absolutely wasn't. I don't think I'd ever taken a drug in my life apart from aspirin. But Hugh just said, no, that's the way he is. And I didn't realize it was odd. But I spoke incredibly fast and was just bounced off the walls. And it seemed to, if I was unwell, it was just a mania because the depression seemed a fair way off. But then towards my 30s, it started to change. And like a lot of people, when you start to get a mood change and you don't know what it is, you don't know that it's an illness, you reach out for something that can alter it. So if you're feeling low, you take something that can make you feel high. In my case, cocaine in a dismally cliche showbiz way. Anyway, it meant that I concentrated on doctors and was given for the first time a proper diagnosis of bipolar disorder and some medication and the medication started to work and I started to learn about this condition and it went and it came back and it went and it came back and anyway, so that's sort of roughly my history. And I stayed on medication for some time, and then I went off it about 4 years ago, because I don't know, as I got married, I was taking more exercise and looking after myself. And I won't claim that these are solutions. If they were, it would be the easiest illness in the world to cure, and it isn't. But again,
you say you don't think those things, necessarily, they're not the cures, obviously, because there is no cure all. But in a very similar way that you can't just have a healthy body. You can try your best, and you can have great wellness principles to be fit and look after your health span and lifespan for your body, but it won't stop you getting cancer. That's just bad luck. That's what can happen. Same thing that I think with mental health. And when I hear you say, that you took up exercise, you stopped drinking alcohol, I know you became a vegetarian. It's not necessarily that diet that I'm specifically saying, but just the conscious awareness to make those changes. They, I'm sure it's no surprise that they help to contribute, like say, not a cure.
If you don't care about yourself, Daniel, if you've given up on yourself or you hate yourself, then you naturally let your body slide as well as your mind. And it is easier to deal with the body. If you start caring about yourself, then it's much easier to say, okay, I'm going to stop poisoning my liver with, all that vodka. I'm going to stop poisoning my nose and brain with all that cocaine. I'm going to walk my body a bit more. I'm going to reward it a bit because I like myself a bit more. That's much easier to do than to turn inwards in your mind and reward your mind, as it were. So that's why, yes. I mean, the only reason I'm saying I'm not saying this is a cure, because I think all psychiatrists would say it's really good idea for people with a mental illness to try and look after their bodies as much as they can. There are two sort of opposite points of view you have to have about a mental illness like bipolar disorder. And one is you must never underestimate its seriousness. It has what doctors call a high morbidity. In other words, it can lead to serious ill health and death. And we all know the suicide figures are very alarming in this country and around the world. So it's not something to take lightly. It can affect, it can cause people to spin out of their family and their work and go right down onto street level where they become, really at the very, very end of everything that's hopeful in life. So you mustn't forget that that's a truth about mental illness. On the other hand, you must also bear in mind that some of the most remarkable and fulfilled and inspiring people who've ever lived have had mental illness.
I think something really helpful, and I certainly know that people would find it helpful to hear from you, is obviously, so it's estimated that 1 in 4 people suffer from a mental health disorder in their time. But if you look at the other side of that figure, 3 in 4 that don't are probably going to know someone, live with someone, have someone close to them that does, and won't necessarily be able to naturally relate to the right way to deal with it, the right way to communicate with them, the right way to be helpful. So do you have any insights or experience from people in your life that have helped you? What has worked, what hasn't worked, what's felt like the right approach and what hasn't?
It's tricky because, almost by definition, if you're having a real sort of episode, you are unreasonable. So sometimes even the most delicate and tactful question can be irritating to one. But generally speaking, I think I've said it before, don't look for a reason in the sense of, are you depressed because I don't know, your bank balance is lower than you thought it would be, or because this, that, or the other. But sometimes depression isn't that simple. It's lowered down on you. It is depressed. It's pushed down onto your mind like a great force, like weather. I've said this, often it is like the weather in as much as it's completely real, but also that it's not one's fault. One didn't create it oneself, and that it isn't permanent. That's the other important thing. But so, the best thing if you see someone's miserable and so on is not to shun them, but just to say, listen, I can't possibly understand what's going on with you, but if there's anything I can do to help, if there's anything that would be useful, let me know. If you want to be let alone, I won't be offended. If you want me to sit with you, I'll happily do that. Just let me know if you can. And that's as kind and good a thing as you can say to someone. But try not to be the doctor and says, I'll cheer them up, because you'll feel a failure for doing it. They'll feel pressure to try and be cheerful just for your sake, when in fact it's going against the natural flow of their illness. So it's a sensitivity thing, really, and I'm sure most people are good at it.
Okay, I'm going to go to some questions
Right.
because we've been getting a lot. So a question from Georgina, who says that she's been diagnosed with bipolar and she wants to know how you coped with it initially and how to come to terms with it.
Well, initially, probably not very well, and as much as I knew so little about it, and I really resisted the idea of medication of any kind. I had it in my mind that any medication was a zombification, and that it was it would destroy my personality. That my illness was part of who I was, and that if any medicine intervened, they would be squashing my personality and my identity, and I became sort of slightly obsessed with that, and also I think there was an arrogance that I believed I could kick it myself, and that it was nonsense, and that there was too much, it was too unscientific, or too, I don't know. I resisted is the answer. But once once I really understood, once a wise doctor looked me in the eye and told me how dangerous it was, and how likely it was. I mean, not 100% likely, but this doctor said to me, a psychiatrist, he said, I think there's a 60% chance you won't live for the next 2 years if you don't do something about this. And I was just absolutely shocked. I still, it gives a shiver when I remember it. And he just looked at me with clear blue eyes and told me. And I said, well, he said, no, you'll take your own life. You'll take your own life, or you'll drink yourself in, or overdose in some way, either accidentally or deliberately. That's the likelihood. It's not overwhelmingly likely, but that's what I think is likely from your illness. And I needed to be told that. I needed to hear that.
Sometimes it is helpful to get metrics and numbers attributed to things.
That's a very good point, Daniel. Absolutely right. And that really did sort of pull me off the edge, as it were, and allowed me to say, yes, let's investigate a cocktail. Because I think what you'll discover, Georgina, is that it's like alcohol. You know how you can sit with someone and you both drink exactly the same. You both have, say, 3 glasses of wine together, and you might feel a bit sleepy, but the person who's drunk exactly the same amount of wine from the same bottle becomes aggressive or loud and a nuisance. They both have the same relatively simple chemical. Alcohol is relatively simple to a chemist as a substance, but with wine, it's got other things in it. Well, how much more is it therefore the case that when a doctor says we're going to try you on this drug, that it's not going to have the same effect on you as it has on someone else? And this is the problem, that a lot of people lose a bit of faith when they first have the diagnosis, because they think there'll be maybe a medical, pharmaceutical treatment that will work straight away. But what happens is it can be a 2 or 3 year, or sometimes much longer period, in which you juggle this, cocktail of pharmaceutical interventions, and maybe they won't work. They don't work for everyone, or maybe they work straight away, or maybe the side effects will depress you, because some of them have weight gain, and just as they help with your mind in one way, they pull you down in another. And you may sort of most people would say, Georgina, and I think this is worth looking at, is that don't turn your back on drugs that the doctors recommend. Don't turn in entirely, but nor turn your back entirely on talk therapy. That most good psychotherapists and good psychiatrists would agree that a mixture of the two is better than one on its own, if you can manage it. And of course, these things might be expensive if you can't get national health cognitive behavioral therapy, say, which is a kind of talk therapy, or psychotherapy, as well as your GP or referring you to a psychiatrist. Then you've just got to bully your GP into showing how much you need it. But also reach out. I obviously say this as president of the institution, Mind, who are benefiting from your kind presence at this event, I'm happy to say, and Mind, and there are other charities, of course, only too happy to try and guide you as you get used to dealing and coping with your condition. But best of luck.